It's been 8 months since I took this job. I traded a badge for a bottle of whiskey, and then I traded the whiskey for the lonely purgatory of the night shift at a place called the Gutter. The name is not a metaphor. It is what it is, and I am what I have become. A bouncer in a dive bar in Detroit, where the windows are boarded up from the inside, and the basement is a forbidden tomb. They call me Marcus. I used to have a last name that people respected, but that's a ghost I don't talk to anymore. My story is a simple one, like so many others. A bad call, a good man dead, and the bottle became my closest friend. The only thing that got me out was the silent promise to myself that I wouldn't let anyone else go down that same road. I came here to keep the peace. The gutter gave me a purpose, or at least a distraction, a hollow routine of wiping down the same sticky bar, watching the same tired faces stumble in and out, and making sure the peace stayed peaceful. But the peace here is a thin, cracked veneer, barely holding back something far darker than the drunks I throw out. This is not a story about a man's journey from darkness to light. This is a story about how some darkness is too deep, too old, to ever be purged. It is a story about a place where a very real crime problem collides with something ancient, something that has been waiting in the dark for a long, long time. This is a story about what happens when you try to clean up a place that doesn't want to be clean. This is what happens when the gutter chooses. If you're listening to this, I need you to do me a favor. Just one thing before we get into it. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. Tell me what time you're watching and what city you're from. Knowing you're out there somewhere helps a little. It makes this feel less like a confession to a ghost and more like a warning. The clock on the wall above the bar's liquor display was missing its hands. It just sat there, a blank circle of time, its silence more unnerving than a ticking sound. This was the gutter's way of telling you that once you were inside, time didn't matter. It was a place for people who had nowhere else to be. The air was thick with the scent of stale beer and old wood. I ran a cloth over the worn surface of the bar, the wood grain soaking up the spilled liquid as if it were thirsty for it. The only other person in the room was Lena, the bartender. She was a woman of few words and 1,000 unspoken stories. Her face a roadmap of hard living. A storm was starting to brew outside, the wind howling a low, mournful sound against the boarded windows. I heard the first drop of rain hit the glass, a soft tap, and then another, and then a cascade of them, all drumming a rhythm against the old building. The light inside was dim and flickering, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. It was a perfect night for ghosts to come out and play. A few patrons were still here, but they were the ghosts of the living. A lone man hunched over a beer, a couple arguing in whispers at a far table, another man muttering to himself in the corner. The night was supposed to be over. The last of the drunks should have been gone an hour ago, but they lingered, drawn to the dim light like moths to a dying flame. That's when I saw him, a man I'd never seen before, sitting in a booth by the back wall. He was staring at a photograph he held in his hand. The man was old, his face lined with the kind of despair that had nothing to do with whiskey. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine for a moment, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the storm. In that brief second, I saw not a man but a reflection of my own silent agony. He looked away back to the photograph. A little while later, he got up, left a crumpled bill on the table, and walked out into the rain. When Lena went to clean his booth, she stopped and stared at the table. She called me over, her voice barely a whisper. On the worn table, next to the money, was a small dusty box. It was a lockbox, the kind you would keep something valuable in. And on top of it, a photograph. It was a picture of a smiling young woman, maybe 20 years old, her hand resting on the shoulder of a man who looked like a younger version of the old man. who had just left. The back of the photo had something written on it, a date, and a set of coordinates. The paper was yellowed and brittle with age. I picked up the box. It was heavy, and a strange cold presence emanated from it. Not like a cold object, but like a whisper of a cold thought. The coordinates led to the old basement, the one no one was ever allowed to enter. I looked at Lena, and her eyes were wide with a fear I recognized from my own past. A fear that knew something was terribly wrong, but could not yet put a name to it. The storm outside raged louder, as if in a fury, and the bar's old boards creaked and groaned in protest. I knew with the kind of terrible certainty you only get after midnight that the old man had not just left a box, he had left a key, and he wanted us to use it. The storm outside had turned into a full-blown tempest. It was as if the world itself was trying to stop us from what we were about to do. The gutter's front door, bolted and chained, rattled with every gust of wind. The back door, leading to the alley, was just as secure. The bar was our little ship, in a sea of rain and howling wind. But we weren't safe. Not really. I felt it in my gut, a tight, cold knot of dread that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the box, the photograph, the silent promise of a secret. We stood in front of the door to the basement, a heavy oak plank with 3 thick deadbolts on it. The wood was old and smelled of rot and dust. This was a door that had not been opened in years, if ever. Based on the thick layer of grime and rust on the locks, I placed my hand on the cold metal and felt a faint vibration, a pulse that seemed to match the thrumming in my own chest. Lena stood behind me, a silent, watchful presence. She pointed to a small keyhole that was almost invisible under the rust and paint. The key from the box was a perfect fit. I hesitated for a moment. This was it. This was the point of no return. I had always promised myself to stay out of trouble, to just do my job. This was not part of the job description. I turned the key, and with a series of groans and metallic shrieks, the 3 deadbolts slid back. The sound was like a scream in the quiet bar. I slowly pulled the heavy door open, and a wave of cold, musty air rushed out. It smelled of damp earth, and something else, something I couldn't place, something almost sweet and sickly, the smell of a forgotten memory, a buried secret. I flicked on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a silver knife. The light revealed a steep set of wooden stairs, each one worn and ancient. A thick layer of dust covered every step, and the cobwebs in the corners looked as old as the building itself. As I descended the stairs, I heard a faint rhythmic sound, a low, soft thudding, as if something was being knocked on from the other side of a thick wall. The thuds were slow and even, a metronome counting down to some unseen moment. It was a sound that had no place in the dusty quiet of an empty basement. It was a living sound. I stopped, listening, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I looked at Lena. She was standing at the top of the stairs, her face pale, her eyes filled with a primal terror. She shook her head, a silent plea for me to turn back, but it was too late. I was already inside the story. I shined the light around the room below. The basement was just as I had expected it to be, a vast, dark space, filled with forgotten things, old crates, empty barrels, a rusting boiler in the corner. But there was something else. A small square patch of the floor was cleaner than the rest, as if something had been recently moved, and on the wall above it, someone had scratched a symbol, a circle, with a single, sharp line cutting through the middle, a broken circle. I knew this was not a place of forgotten things. It was a place of things that were carefully put away. and something had just come back to claim them. The thudding stopped the moment I reached the bottom of the stairs. The silence that followed was even more profound than the darkness itself. I stood there, the flashlight beam sweeping across the damp concrete floor, the smell of earth and decay filling my lungs. The basement was a crypt, a place where things went to be forgotten. But I wasn't here to forget. I was here to remember. The photograph from the old man was still tucked in my pocket. The image of the young woman, a silent guide. I looked at the symbol on the wall again. The broken circle. It felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. A child's drawing? A forgotten piece of graffiti? No, it was too deliberate, too intentional. My eyes fell on the clean spot on the floor. It was maybe 4 feet by 4 feet, a perfect square. The dust around it was thick, but the square was almost pristine, as if a heavy object had been sitting there for a very long time and had only recently been removed. I knelt down, running my hand over the concrete. It was cold to the touch, but there was something else. A faint line, a thin scratch, ran from the edge of the square toward the wall. I followed it with my flashlight. The line led to a small, hidden metal grate in the corner, a ventilation shaft I had never noticed before. The grate was rusted shut, but the line of dust led directly to it. I realized the thudding I had heard was coming from behind that grate. I worked at the grate with a crowbar from a dusty corner, the metal protesting every pull. The sound was a screech against the silence. When it finally came loose, I was hit by another wave of air, this time even colder, and with a different smell, not just damp earth, but something acrid and metallic, like old blood and rust. I shone my light into the opening. It was a small tunnel, maybe 2 feet wide, and it disappeared into the darkness. I could feel a faint draft from within, a cold breath of stale air. As I stared into the darkness, I saw something, a piece of fabric, a small fragment of a shirt, caught on a jagged edge of the metal. It was a faded blue color. I recognized it. It was the same color as the shirt the young man in the photograph was wearing. A cold hand seemed to close around my heart. This was no coincidence. The man who had left the box, the photograph, the old man, he had been here. He had been down here. He had been looking for something. I reached my hand into the tunnel, pulling the fabric free. It was coarse and old, and as I held it, a strange vision flashed in my mind, a vision of a young man, laughing, his hand resting on a young woman's shoulder, a woman I now knew was his fiancée, because the photograph in my pocket had a ring on her finger. And then the vision changed. The laughter turned to a scream. The young man's face contorted in a mask of pure terror, and the woman's face was a blur, a smear of darkness. I pulled my hand back, my breath catching in my throat. This was not a memory of a ghost. This was a memory of a victim, and I was standing in the very spot where it had all started. The bar was now our bunker, a sealed tomb against the raging storm outside. Lena had joined me in the basement, her face a pale mask of concern, her silence a heavy weight in the oppressive air. She had not said a word since I pulled the key from the box. She just stood there, her hands clasped, watching me with wide, terrified eyes. I looked at the patch of fabric in my hand, then at the hole in the wall. This was no longer just a curiosity. This was a crime scene, a cold case that was about to get a whole lot colder. I started to methodically search the area around the grate. My training from my old life kicked in. I was an investigator, a man of facts and evidence. I had to approach this with logic, not fear. I moved old barrels and boxes, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. It was a painstaking process. The floor was covered in a thick, uneven layer of dirt and dust, and every move kicked up a cloud of it. That's when I saw it. Tucked away under a pile of old, rotting sacks was a small tape recorder. It was a bulky, old model, the kind you'd see in a detective movie from the 70s. The tape inside was still there, but it was covered in dust and grime. I took it out, cleaned the tape as best I could with my shirt sleeve, and put it back in the machine. I hit the play button, and with a soft whir, a voice filled the silent basement. It was the voice of a man, strained and anxious. It was the old man, the one from the bar. "This is day 187, the voice began. "My name is Arthur Reed. I came to this place looking for my son and his fiancée. I know they came here. They said they were coming here to the gutter to celebrate, but they never came back out. The police, they didn't care. They just said they ran away. But they wouldn't have, not without their things, not without a word. They wouldn't have just disappeared. I'd been a private investigator for 40 years, and I know a disappearing act when I see one, and this is something else." The voice on the tape was shaky, filled with a desperate kind of certainty. He continued his story, his voice a low, steady drone. He spoke of coming to the bar, of being told the basement was off limits. He spoke of finding the same broken circle symbol on an old ledger in the city archives, a symbol connected to a series of other disappearances, all happening at this very location. The gutter, all of them, he said, were people who were trying to escape their pasts, people who were running from a mistake, a secret, a regret, people who were trying to start over, but never got the chance. He ended the tape with a single, chilling thought. "It doesn't close, it chooses." I turned off the recorder, the silence of the basement crashing down on us again. I looked at Lena, my face pale. She finally spoke, her voice a low whisper. "He was not the first one," she said. "Not by a long shot. And if we don't do something, he won't be the last." The storm outside seemed to scream in response, and I knew then that we were no longer just a bouncer and a bartender. We were the next set of names on a very long list.
Well, I spent the next 2 days trying to find the old ledger Arthur Reed had mentioned on the tape. I went to the city archives, a silent, vast building that smelled of old paper and dust. I told the librarian I was a history buff, researching old Detroit bars, and she gave me access to the historical records. I had to go through dozens of ledgers, old dusty tomes that chronicled everything from property taxes to city ordinances. Most of them were dry, mundane records of a city that was slowly crumbling. But then I found it. A ledger from the early 1950s, with a section dedicated to unexplained events.
The section was a record of police reports and missing persons cases that were never solved, and the one common thread was the gutter. There were 10 names on the list, people who had disappeared between the years of 1951 and 1953. Each report had a small, crude drawing next to the name, the broken circle symbol. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a pattern. The police had written them off as runaways, drunks, or people who had just vanished. But Arthur Reed had been right. It was a pattern of disappearances, a quiet, methodical culling of people from the city's margins, and it was all happening here, at the bar. I found a note scrawled in the margins of the ledger, a separate, almost invisible entry. It was an unofficial note from a police officer, a man named Sergeant Miller. He wrote about a secret protocol the department had, a protocol to handle the disappearances from the gutter. The protocol was not a search party or an investigation. It was a cover-up. He wrote that the city had made a deal with something ancient, something that lived in the darkness beneath the city. He wrote that the gutter was a place for this thing to feed. The police were a part of it, a silent organization of men who knew the truth, but chose to look the other way. He wrote that the thing, the parasite, needed a host, a man or a woman who carried a deep, unshakable sense of guilt. He wrote that the thing would whisper to them, promise them a new life, a new beginning, and when they were ready, it would take them. He wrote that he had seen a man go into the bar with a woman, and that the man had been a witness to a terrible crime, but had never said anything about it. And he wrote that he saw the woman's shadow as it stretched and twisted, and then the man was gone. I closed the ledger, my heart a lead weight in my chest. The broken circle was a symbol of a broken promise, a broken life, a broken truth. Sergeant Miller had a terrible secret. He was a part of a conspiracy, an old and silent agreement with a creature of the dark, and now I was a part of it too. I was sitting here, looking at the evidence, and I had a choice to tell the truth or to walk away and pretend I never saw any of it. The truth came with a price, and I was not sure I was ready to pay it. I went back to the bar after my trip to the archives. The knowledge I had gained a heavy, terrible burden. The gutter felt different now. The smell of stale beer and old wood was still there, but now it was a cover for something else, something I could almost feel breathing in the corners of the room. I knew now that every person who came here was a potential victim. Every tired face, every lost soul, every person with a secret they couldn't outrun, they were all on the list. Blaney was at the bar, polishing a glass. She looked up when I came in, and her face was a question. I showed her a copy of Sergeant Miller's note. She read it, her eyes scanning the words, and when she was done, she put the note down and looked at me. Her expression, a mix of terror and resignation. "My grandfather," she whispered. "He used to tell me stories about a ghost that lived under the city, a ghost that took people who were running from their pasts. I never believed him." The storm outside had subsided, but the wind still whispered against the boarded windows. I started to hear it, a faint, almost inaudible sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a soft, sibilant whisper, a murmur of forgotten words. It was not English, or any language I knew. It was the language of regret. I felt a presence, a cold, silent weight in the room, and I knew it was watching us. It was waiting for us to make a mistake, to show a weakness. I looked at my reflection in the dark, empty windows of the bar. I saw a man with tired eyes, and a face etched with guilt. I saw a man who had made a mistake, and who had been running from it for months. But I was not the only one. The man from the photograph, the old man, the people from the ledger, they all had a past. They all had a secret. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of silent, invisible voices, all promising to take the pain away. I felt my hand reaching for the doorknob, and for a moment I almost did it. I almost gave in. But then I looked at Lena, and I saw her fear, and I knew that to give in was to condemn her too. I pulled my hand back. I would not be another name on the list. The next night, I came to the bar with a plan. I was not going to let this thing win. I was going to fight back. I had the ledger, the note from Sergeant Miller, the tape recorder from Arthur Reed. I had the facts. Now I needed to find a way to use them. I had done some research on my own, on old Detroit police cases, and I found something, a single, Small article from a local newspaper from 1954. It was about a series of gruesome murders in the city. The article was short, and the details were vague, but it mentioned a cult, a group of people who believed they could gain immortality by sacrificing people who were burdened with guilt. The article was quickly buried and forgotten. The cult believed that guilt was a kind of currency, a spiritual weight that could be used to fuel a parasitic entity that lived under the city. They called it the void. They believed that by feeding the void, they could be spared from their own guilt, and that they could be given a kind of terrible immortality. The gutter was their church. The basement was their altar. The broken circle was their symbol. The ritual was simple. Find a lost soul, a person with a heavy heart, and offer them to the void. The man from the tape, Arthur Reed, had been right. It was a cult, but it was also something more. The cult was just a group of people who had found a way to serve the monster. I opened my eyes and stared into the dark hole. I saw a face now, a grotesque parody of a human face, with a gaping mouth and eyes that glowed with a pale, cold light. It was the void, and it was coming for me. I knew what I had to do. The cult was long gone. The protocol was a cover-up, but the parasite was still here, and it was still hungry. I knew the only way to stop it was not to fight it with a gun or with my fists. It was to fight it with the truth. I had to expose it. I had to let the world know what was happening in this dark place. I ran back upstairs, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I had to warn Lena. I had to tell her what I had seen, but she was gone. The bar was empty. The door to the basement was open. A sliver of darkness in the corner of the room. I felt a cold dread, a fear that was more terrible than anything I had felt before. I had been right. It was not just a cult. It was a parasite, and it had taken Lena. I ran to the back door, and it was locked. The boarded windows were secure. I was trapped inside with a monster. I was trapped inside with my own guilt. The whispers were a roar now, a deafening cacophony of voices in my head. They were all my own thoughts, my own fears, my own regrets. My dead partner's face was everywhere, in the shadows, in the flickering light, in the distorted reflection, in a spilled puddle of beer on the floor. I was going insane. The parasite was doing what it did best. It was making me lose my mind. It was preparing me for the offering. I stumbled to the basement door and looked down into the darkness. I saw her, Lena. She was standing at the bottom of the stairs, her back to me. She was holding something in her hands, a small glowing orb of pale light. The orb was pulsing, a low, rhythmic thudding that I now recognized as the sound I had heard before. It was a heartbeat. She turned around and her face was not her own. Her eyes were black, empty pools, and her mouth was stretched into a wide, unnatural smile. It was the void, wearing her like a mask. "Join us, Marcus," she whispered, her voice a distorted parody of her own. "Give me your guilt. Give me your past. We will make you whole again. We will make you beautiful." The glowing orb in her hands was pulsating with a terrible energy. It was a piece of herself, a part of her soul that she was offering to the parasite. It was a sacrifice. The cult's ritual was not a human one. It was a ritual of surrender, of offering yourself up to the darkness and letting it consume you. I looked at the twisted form of the void, wearing Lena's face like a trophy, and I knew what I had to do. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't shoot it. I couldn't kill it. The only way to win was to expose it. I had to get out of the bar, and I had to tell the truth. I looked at the boarded windows. the chained door, and I knew it was impossible. But then I remembered something Arthur Reed had said on the tape. He had said that the void was a parasite, and a parasite needed a host. It could not exist without one. The moment it took a host, it was bound to it, and the only way to kill it was to kill the host. I had a terrible choice to make, to save my own life, or to save Lena, to run, or to stay. The whispers were now a scream, and the face of my dead partner was everywhere. I knew what I had to do. It was a terrible, awful choice, but it was the only one I had. I ran to the bar, my mind a whirlwind of fear and purpose. The whispers from the void were a deafening roar in my head, a chorus of all my past mistakes and sorrows, but I focused on one thing: the note from Sergeant Miller, the part about the protocol, the part about the void needing a host to live. I had a terrible, final plan. It was a plan that would cost me everything, but it was the only way to end this, to stop the void from claiming another victim. I ran behind the bar, my hands fumbling for the phone. I had to call for help. I had to tell someone. But the phone was dead. The storm had cut the lines. I was alone. I was trapped. I was a lamb to the slaughter. I looked at the flickering lights in the bar, the dancing shadows on the walls, and I saw a reflection of myself. A man with a dead partner on his hands, a man who had chosen to run away from his past, and had found himself trapped in a new kind of hell. I looked at Lena's distorted face, her empty eyes staring at me from the bottom of the stairs. The glowing orb in her hands was pulsing with a violent, sickening light. The whispers were now a promise, a soft, seductive murmur of eternal peace, of a final rest. I felt my resolve waver. Maybe it was a good idea. Maybe I should just give in. It would all be over. The guilt, the pain, the loneliness, all of it. I would finally be free. But then I saw a memory of my dead partner, his face smiling, his hand on my shoulder. He was telling me that we were partners, that we had each other's backs no matter what. He was telling me to be strong, and I knew that I could not give in. I could not let the void win. I would not let it make me into a monster. I ran to the back wall of the bar, where an old shotgun was mounted as a decoration. It was a rusted, antique piece, a silent testament to a forgotten time. I grabbed it from the wall. My hands fumbling with the old weapon, I looked at the void, wearing Lena's face, standing at the bottom of the stairs, and I felt a pang of despair. I couldn't shoot it, not with Lena still inside, but I had to do something. I had to fight back. I had to make my stand. I raised the shotgun, not at the void, but at the basement door. I shot the door, the blast a deafening roar. In the silent bar, the old wood splintered, and the door fell back with a loud crash. The storm outside howled in response, a fierce, angry cry. I ran out into the pouring rain, leaving the shotgun behind. I knew what I had to do. I had to run, not from my past, but from the void. I had to make it follow me. I had to make it leave the gutter and come out into the open, where it would be a target. I ran out into the alley behind the bar, the rain a cold sheet against my face. The air was filled with the sound of the storm and the silent, deafening whispers of the void. I could feel it behind me, a cold presence, a heavy weight that was moving with a silent, unnatural speed. I didn't look back. I just ran, my feet splashing in the puddles on the ground, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I ran toward the street, toward the faint, distant lights of the city. I knew I couldn't outrun it, but I could make a distraction. I could lure it out into the open. I looked behind me. and I saw her. Lena, she was standing at the end of the alley, her face a twisted parody of a smile, her eyes glowing with a pale, cold light. She was holding the glowing orb in her hands, and it was pulsing with a terrible energy. "You can't run, Marcus," she whispered, her voice a low, sibilant hiss. "You can't escape your past. You can't outrun your guilt. It will find you. It will always find you." I turned and ran faster, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew she was right. I couldn't run from my past, but I could fight it. I could make a stand. I ran out onto the street, the rain still pouring down. I saw a police car, its lights a beacon of hope in the darkness. I waved my hands, shouting for help, but the car just drove on, its occupants oblivious to the horror unfolding behind them. The police were a part of the protocol. They were a part of the cover-up. They would not help me. I was on my own. I was a man with a dead partner, a man with a secret, a man with a monster on his tail, and I had a choice to make, to run or to fight. I turned to face the void, still wearing Lena's face, still holding the glowing orb. I saw a memory flash in my mind, a memory of my partner, his face smiling, his hand on my shoulder. I saw myself, a young man with a badge, a man with a purpose, and I saw the path that had led me to this moment, the path of guilt and regret, the path that had brought me to the gutter. I looked at the void, and I saw my own reflection in her empty eyes. I saw the face of my own sorrow, my own shame, and I knew what I had to do.
I walked toward her, my hands open, my face a mask of resolve. I would not fight it. I would not run. I would not be another name on the list. I would be its last name. I would be the one who finally ended it. I would give it what it wanted. I would give it my guilt.
I don't know how long it's been since that night. I am still here. I am still in this purgatory, but the gutter is closed now. The boarded windows are gone. The door is chained shut, and no one ever goes inside. The police have filed a report about a gas leak, a fire, and a structural collapse. A fire that never happened. A collapse that was never real. They are still playing their part in the protocol. They are still protecting the void. But the void is not in the gutter anymore. It is in me. I gave it my guilt, my sorrow, my shame, and it took it all. It took my memories of my partner, my memories of my old life, my memories of Lena. It took everything that made me human, and it left me an empty shell. I am a bouncer in a bar that doesn't exist anymore. I am a man with a last name that no one remembers. I am a ghost, but I am also a guardian. I am the man who finally ended the ritual. I am the one who keeps the void from claiming another victim. I am the one who lives in this lonely purgatory, making sure that the gutter never chooses again. The whispers are still there, in my head, a low buzzing hum that never stops. But they are not whispers of my own guilt. They are the whispers of the void's hunger, and every day I fight it. Every day I make it my purpose to keep it at bay, to keep it from getting out. I am its cage. I am its prison. I am its final host. I still have a photograph in my pocket. It is a picture of a young woman with a ring on her finger, and I still have the old man's note, the one that says, "It doesn't close, it chooses." He was right, and it chose me. This is a story about a place where a real crime problem collides with something ancient and terrible. And it's a story about a man who finally decided to stop running from his past, to stop running, and to stand his ground. It's a story that has no ending. It's a story that is still being written in the dark corners of a city and in the lonely recesses of a man's mind. Share this story with someone. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell. Maybe it will help. Maybe it will give me a little bit of hope. Maybe it will help me keep it locked up for one more day.